Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Hey, believe it or not, it's actually National Signing Day for football. Women's basketball got a big one coming up down in Raleigh on Thursday against number 3 NC State. And then men's basketball. What's going on? Can we make one final push for the postseason? It's all coming up on episode 346 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. We record on Wednesday, February 7th, 2024, from our studio right here at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com. Check out our extensive editorial content, and as always, the first month of subscriptions is free. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. Across the way, our managing editor, Mr. David Cunningham. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. And sitting in the fourth chair today, our senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. Behind the scenes producing today, Jay Briz, as they call him. Jack Brizendine. Appreciate him as always. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. This episode of the TSL podcast is also brought to you by Triumph NIL. Triumph is a unique and experienced sports marketing agency specializing in building custom name, image, and likeness partnerships for student athletes. NIL is working here at Virginia Tech, and Triumph NIL is a big reason as to why. Visit triumphnil.com to learn more, subscribe, and support the Hokies in NIL. Well, let's start, gentlemen, today by talking a little bit of football content, as we always do. It goes completely under the radar, but today is actually National Signing Day. It felt like we got it all out of the way with early signing period early on in December.
We did get it all out of the way.
Yeah.
Because nothing's going to happen today as far as I know. If you look, I think, on 247 Sports, if you just look at the top 100 guys, they've all signed. Maybe a few of those signed this morning. I don't know. But, yeah, this is the signing day that nobody ever talks about because hardly anything ever happens on this date every year now.
This used to be like a national holiday for like the hardcore college football fans where, you know, you get to the offseason, there's nothing going on. And then all of a sudden, like 30 guys sign at your school, and it used to be they come in on the fax machines, and then the schools would announce them one by one. And then, like, this is before Twitter, before all that stuff. Like, this was the day of days in the off season, and now it's just like an afterthought. There's nothing going on. Everybody's moved on to the 2025 class, and even beyond that, in some cases. And if you haven't, you're behind right now. So it's really interesting how recruiting has evolved like that. This used to be like a really fun but obnoxious day early in February, just because you'd have to wake up at 5 a.m. and you knew it was going to be a long day. And now they kind of cram it into the bowl game where it gets lost a little bit in the shuffle. And I don't know. It's not quite as neat as it used to be, I think.
And think about it. Well, think about how many of the kids Tech signed in this class that, like, in previous years would have signed today. Mm-hmm. A bunch of them are enrolled already.
Right.
Like they're going through, they're in class right now. So like that's another big difference.
It is. And yeah, like Andy said, this used to be the day it kind of killed the boredom between the end of football season and the start of spring practice. And now they've decided it's a great idea to just dump everything on everybody the week before Christmas, right in the middle of basketball season. Brilliant. But,
well, I think even as recently as, like, what was your Dax signed? Is that 2018? I think he signed on the February dates. I mean, even somebody of like that caliber would have signed as that late. And then, most of the classes signed on the early date. Now everybody signs in December. Like, unless you're undecided about a coaching change or something, flips the last second, you sign in December and move on with your life. So I don't know. I'm getting kind of wistful about the old February signing day, even though I used to hate it because it was just like, oh my gosh, such overkill in a downtime of the season. I kind of miss it now because there's nothing going on right now.
I know Pry, when he was with Franklin at Vanderbilt, they started doing the like signing day show. Were they doing that for like the February signing day? Or-
I'm
They
pretty
were.
sure it was the February.
I
signing
remember
day.
watching
Well,
it,
they didn't
but-
have the December signing day back.
I remember
then.
watching it because they stole a recruit from Tech on signing day.
It was a quarterback,
It
right?
was LaFonte Thorogood from the 757.
And that was the world was ending when that happened.
The
Oh my
world was
gosh, they're
ending.
losing quarterback recruits to Vanderbilt. It's
pretty
a
sure he
sign
never
of-
played it. They moved him within a few weeks. They moved him to running back, and I don't think he ever played it down at Vanderbilt. But the world was ending. But what struck me was like I watched a video of when his LOI came in and to Vanderbilt, and they had started their whole signing day war room thing, where they were all, Vanderbilt filmed them getting the faxes. That was still back when they faxed things and stuff like that. I want to say that was probably like the 2012 class, 2013
Yeah, that was a
class,
while ago.
something like that. It's been a while.
Babyface Brent Pry there without a beard.
Without a beard. Yeah.
Hazel comes in because he was on that staff as
Yeah.
well coming in. Michael Hazel, the chief of staff here now, was
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what he was at Vanderbilt at that time. But
They
yeah,
were-
I think he was one of the guys bringing in the names to give them to James Franklin.
I think you're right. So the current Tech staff was trend setting at Vanderbilt at the time, and we were all angry about it at the time because they were still in
Yeah, it's
our
funny.
quarterback recruit.
I just think it's so funny because it's like, if you're a high school kid, why wouldn't you sign in December? If it's like, say you're a high school kid and you're signing with Virginia Tech, you wouldn't want to miss out on being part of the big show, right?
Right.
Like, why would you wait and make your decision in February when you could do it in December? And
Unless you had a late coaching change somewhere,
Yeah.
or you just really didn't know where you wanted to go. Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, even thinking about it in as a regular student, like I don't think they're doing early decision stuff anymore at Tech in the future, right? But in the past, it's always early decision. I think I accepted at Virginia Tech in like December.
I did too.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than
I
waiting.
don't know, Gio, what did you?
Here,
Yeah.
I was. What is the between early decision? I was early decision to a different school that we're not allowed to talk about anymore. Then kind of backed out of that. I was early action.
Decommit.
Early action here.
You decommitted, you flipped.
You're not loyal.
There was a flippage. Early action. What's that? Like in between,
Yeah.
right?
Was this the University of Upstate New York? Is that what you're referring to? Or
Yeah,
is it-
something
okay.
around Onondaga, something.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in that territory.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because it's like not a lot of stuff's late anymore. Everybody does it early.
Yeah.
Like whether you're regular students or recruiting, and I don't know, it's very weird because like for basketball and stuff, like a lot of those kids, their signing days earlier, and they sign in like October, November. It's like you get to Christmas and basically all the athletes know where they're going except for football, and then it's like, okay, football finally signs. It's changed so much over the years.
Well, Andy was just talking about how everyone kind of has already flipped the script to the 2025 recruiting class. Hokies have done just that for the most part. Visiting season is in the full swing of things. Chris, any updates for us on next year's class with the visits coming on?
Tech's going out into high schools like they normally do and visiting, but they're also hosting visitors anywhere from the class of 2025 through, I've even seen like a class of 2027 guy committed. And no, I'm not going to do articles on 2027 guys at this point. That'd be a little bit extreme. But, here's a few names to keep in mind and one trend. I think Tech, going back to last year's offensive line class, they're kind of targeting with offensive linemen with bigger frames. And one example is Skylar Harvey. I think he's from Maryland. He's visited recently, 6'7", 330 pounds. Big guy already. Jalen Gilchrist, Virginia Beach, has visited. He's another offensive lineman. Pretty highly touted guy. Micah Matthews is ranked as high as number 2 in the state. He's from Turner Ashby, which is up around Bridgewater. But is he going to play football or baseball? He's a former South Carolina baseball commit. Virginia Tech is apparently recruiting him for both. His recruiting, they take pictures on their visits. And
He had pictures with
he had
baseball.
pictures in baseball and football on his visit. To Tech.
Malachi Thomas was recruited to
He
Tech
was
for baseball as
apparently
well.
had a pretty good fastball. Jeff Overton, very productive running back from Freedom High School in Nova. That's where Josh Fuga went. They're a dominant program in the state, maybe even the dominant program in the state right now. Another DeMatha guy, Noah Chambers. He's a linebacker. He visited, and Virginia Tech appears to be in pretty good shape there. with the work Virginia Tech has put in at DeMatha over the last couple of years with Emmett Laws and Dante Lovett,
And Elijah Brooks.
yeah, exactly. You would expect Virginia Tech to be a strong contender there. And some more in-state guys. Deuce Edwards is a cornerback from Trinity Episcopal in Richmond. He's good friends with Knowledge Harrell, who's a fellow cornerback from Green Run. Knowledge, by the way, is spelled Knahlij.
Is this like a Stone Smart situation where it's SMARTT, like smart and knowledge spelled a different way?
Yeah,
It's very strange.
He's got a final three of Tech, West Virginia, and Maryland. Another Green Run player who's visited recently is wide receiver Jaden Anderson. Final six of Tech, Maryland, Tennessee, Auburn, South Carolina, and West Virginia. Those Green Run guys are tight with Keelan Adams, who enrolled this month and was one of the top recruits in the state. And, I think you could potentially see some guys make decisions pretty soon. I think not a ton of them, but, Tech will start. I mean, Tech has already started picking up commits. They've already got 2 for the 2025 class. But, you'll see some more come into the boat fairly soon, I think. It actually impresses me about Keelan Adams that he set all those receiving records while also sharing the ball with another high-profile wide receiver commit in Jaden Anderson. I mean, this guy's final six is Tech, Maryland, Tennessee, Auburn, South Carolina, and West Virginia. He's a pretty highly thought-of player. Even Knowledge Harrell, he's being recruited as a cornerback, also plays wide receiver, had a decent number of catches as well. So that's a lot of passes to spread out amongst 3 guys, and yet one of those guys was able to go on and break a whole lot of in-state records. I think that says a lot about the passing game that they've built there at Green Run.
Can you explain to everybody, Chris, kind of what's the timetable if they do want to, remember these names, keep a lookout for these guys? For some people that may not follow recruiting as heavily and are looking to get into it, how can they do that?
Well, when they commit, we'll write an article about them.
Okay.
I've actually already got a couple of articles written already, just anticipating commitments. So I wouldn't expect to have to wait too much longer on some of these guys.
Cool stuff. Well, Andy wrote a really cool article about the 2019 Virginia Tech class. At the time, they finished 27th in the country, ranked as far as incoming recruiting class. Andy, that was fun. A little bit of a trip down memory lane. What jumped out to you as far as where these guys are now?
Well, I like to be the counterbalance that everybody's always excited about future classes, and I like to go back to past classes and go, it's ridiculous the amount of time that in ink that is spilled on these guys in these classes, because you just don't know how it's going to turn out. I mean, when you sign them, they're all superstars in your mind. Oh, this guy's going to be great. This guy's going to be great. The potential here. And the truth is, half of them sort of wash out. Maybe like a third of them actually amount to like regular starters on the team. You're seeing more and more transfers in the portal that don't even finish here. So you look at that 2019 class, there's some talented players in there. Not a lot of those talented players finish their careers at Virginia Tech. I mean, the top end of the class, especially, just, a lot of what ifs with transfers, medical retirements, injuries, guys that were just plain busts. You look at the breadth of the class, 8 multi-year starters: Tavion Robinson, Nick Gallo, Josh Fuga, Mario Kendricks, Norrell Pollard. Amare Barno is a really good one, probably the best player in the class they signed. Braxton Burmeister and Brock Hoffman as transfers. But, the very top of, the top-rated high school players that they signed that year, Jaden Payute, always hurt, had 1 career catch, had to medically retire, hamstring and leg injuries. Catch. It was a really good catch
in a
really bad game in the Pinstripe Bowl. Fitting that, the one catch that he had was in that game. Doug Nestor transferred to West Virginia. Brian Hudson transferred to Louisville. J.R. Walker never really panned out here, 4-star guy. Those were the 4 blue chip guys they signed in this class, and none of them finished their careers here or played when they were seniors, medical retirements, transfers. So when you miss on guys like that, or they end up transferring somewhere else and playing, and even when you look at the top 8, I think Tavion Robinson was really the only one who hit, and even he transferred for his last 2 years here. It's tough to build something long-term. And you look at some of the problems that occurred in the early rebuild with Brent Pry, and you can probably tie it directly a lot to this class and other classes around it, and the comings and goings with players. But They signed 4 offensive linemen in this class. None of them made it to the finish line here. The 2 transfers, 2 other medical retirements that left here, Jesse Hansen and William Pritchard. The receivers in this class, Tavion Robinson hit, then transferred somewhere else. The other ones, Elijah Bowick, Jacoby Pinkney, never made it here, never really made any impact here. Jaden Payute transferring somewhere else. So when Brent Pry comes in and it's like, well, you got Caleb Smith and nobody else at receiver, you can look at this class and go, well, those guys didn't pan out. And, that was a pretty rough evaluation for that class, I would say.
I've got one thing to add about one player in that class who was actually one of the lower rated players in the class, Josh Fuga, who is one of 2 guys in that class, right? One of 2 who's still here.
Yeah,
Him and
Gallo, right?
Gallo.
So Fuga, and this goes back to why I think some of the evaluations in that class were so bad. Fuga was the first player Tech evaluated once they got a subscription to Huddle and were able to evaluate full game film of players, and they weren't able to evaluate him until December. So at that point, almost everybody's committed, and he was committed to Temple at the time. Tech evaluates him, and he plays every snap on both sides of the ball for Freedom. He did not stand out from a playmaking perspective per se. Like, he wasn't somebody in the backfield making 20 or 30 tackles for loss per season. But he only lost 1 rep all year. He was just steady. And so Tech offered him based on that. That's pretty much the player he's been at Virginia Tech. Like, he's not a guy who makes many tackles for loss. He doesn't play in the backfield a ton. But you also don't find yourself saying Fuga got beat on that play, right? He's just a solid player who doesn't really take it to the opposition past the line of scrimmage per se, but he always holds his gap and does a good solid job. So that's a case if they were able to get a full evaluation on a player, probably one of the few guys in that class they were able to get a complete every game evaluation on. And he turned out to be exactly what the film said he was.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to go back and look and see what day he committed. If it was assuming it was after early signing day.
It was late. He committed during I was with my daughter at a basketball game. I remember because I was trying to tweet it, and then I talked to Jed Castro later, and he said that it was up on the big board. He's like, Andy, look up from your phone, because my daughter was behind me, like kind of hamming it up on the thing. And I was trying to tweet out the Josh Fuga commitment at the time. But do you think the previous staff was like very anti-vaping because they had to watch all those anti-vaping commercials on Huddle?
There's an even more. Yes, please. If you vape, please stop, just so we don't have to watch those ads anymore. But there's an even worse one there now. It's like some sort of Google ad, and it freezes up like every 3 seconds. And it freezes up for like 5 seconds, and then it starts again, and it freezes up again. It's a 15-second ad. It takes like 45 seconds to a minute to actually watch it. And the thing about Huddle is you can't like go to another tab and do something else while the ad runs. It pauses the ad no matter what. So you literally just have to sit there and wait for this ad to freeze and unfreeze. And so it makes it really annoying. That's why I haven't quite watched as many recruits at this point as I normally do, because it's really tough to get through that ad over and over and over again.
So Josh Fuga, I found your article from December 16th, 2018, Chris. Josh Fuga committed on a Sunday afternoon. He was the 18th commitment of the class, and it was the Sunday before signing day on Wednesday.
Right.
So that's how late they were working on him.
Right, like his senior season ended. They were able to watch his entire senior season, and then they pulled the trigger. So some of those, it would be interesting, like if you could go back in time, and it's easier to get evaluations on in-state guys because they're local. You can see more games probably than you can out-of-state guys. But some of those guys like Jacoby Pinkney from South Carolina, right? He was pretty highly touted. He was highly ranked. And probably I'd give him 3.5 stars based on his offer list and everything like that. But like, could you really get a complete evaluation on him? It's not like you can go to South Carolina every Friday night and watch him play.
That was almost an immediate bust.
Right.
Like the second
it was
he got
immediate.
Here, I think they knew it. They're that was a misfire on that one.
So like, if you go back and have complete evaluation tools for some of those early classes, you wonder if any of them could have. Well, they would have turned out different to a certain extent. Like there were players in this class who probably wouldn't be in the class And then there were players in other teams' classes who might have been in Virginia Tech's classes.
A couple things about this class. 16 of the 22 high school junior college signees ended up transferring somewhere else by the end. That's a high number. Usually it's like 40 to 50%. I mean, you're up in the 72, 73% range there. That's a ton. And, coaching change, a lot of guys are going to get processed from a program at that point. That would happen. That's just a really high number, though. 5 medical retirements in that class. Yeah. That's unusual. I haven't gone back and tracked that year by year, but anecdotally, that sounds high. Again, that might be part of the coaching change process, too, where it's just an easy way out for some of these guys. Like, well, I'll just take the medical, and then the coach gets the scholarship. They get to continue their education. 1 draft pick so far, Amari Barno, 6th round pick. That's one of the fewest for any classes going back. I think there's one class, 2012 class had no draft picks. That was the only one since I've been doing this where there was no draft picks. 1 all ACC selection in this class. And I know you guys read the story, but can you remember who the one selection
who was? It?
Tavion Robinson.
It was Tavion Robinson. Amari Barno was just an honorable mention, even though he led the ACC in tackles for loss.
So why do we even pay attention to that anymore?
It's so ridiculous. Yeah. The voting was pretty bad there. And I'll mention just the look at the in-state. I always like to see what was Virginia like in that year, because this is sort of where the slide started in terms of in-state recruiting. I think that comes to a head in the 2020 class. Spoiler in the 2020 class review that I do next year, it's not going to be pretty overall and in-state especially. But Paiute was the number 4 player in the class. Brandon Smith, the number 1 player, went to Penn State, recruited by Brent Pry. It was a thorn in the side for the Hokies back then. The number 2 player, running back Devin Ford. How much angst and just hysterics were there when Devin Ford ended up picking Penn State over Virginia Tech, and he never had more than 300 yards in any season. He finished his career at Notre Dame. He had 44 yards last year.
He grew up a Tech fan. Like, even some of his recruiting pictures, he's wearing a Virginia Tech jersey, like at his high school. Tech even got Michael Vick to meet him one-on-one personally, at least once, maybe twice. Still went to Penn State, and everybody was mad. And then how many career rushing yards did he have?
It was like 700 in 5 years across 2 schools. I mean, just never made an impact. I mean, it's amazing how much you think, this guy's the difference maker. He's the, and you look at somebody like Tre'Veyon Henderson, who was absolutely that. Or the guy at Michigan.
Blake Corum?
Yeah, Blake Corum. Another guy that I think Tech was trying to get in on early.
From Virginia.
He's a Virginia guy.
Didn't really show interest in the Hokies too much.
He did. He left campus basically a silent verbal to that class. And then
Michigan big timed him. And that's it.
Here's the story. His coach was a big Big Ten guy. I'll put it that way. And he put a bunch of his players in a van, took them to all the Big Ten schools. And so Corum was basically like, I'm not gonna say pressured, but he wasn't actually going to go visit those other schools until his coach was like, you're going to go visit those other schools. And so Tech really felt like they had him, and then all those other visits happened.
Corum made a good decision.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Other guys in this class, Mike Sainristel was an early commitment for Virginia Tech. They got him, and I remember I was like, is he big enough to play college football and stuff? And
he's big enough to start for Michigan.
He flipped to Michigan and is an All-American, wins a national title. Brandon Dorless was another guy who was committed briefly. Actually, I was surprised to see he was a first-team All Pac-12 pick as a senior.
This is the name I've been thinking of that's been escaping me recently. I've mentioned this story before. He's one of the reasons I started to not hate, but roll my eyes at recruiting. He committed to Tech on a weekend in like August, and he was committing on a radio show. I believe he was from Florida.
Yeah,
and so I was like, okay, he's going to commit at this time. This radio show is on. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon, so I've got a cookout to go to. And I'm like, but that's okay. I know what time he's going to commit. So I start listening to the radio show. And they talk about him for 15 minutes. And then they interview like his head coach for 15 minutes.
Let's talk to the strength coach.
They interview this guy for 15. And finally, like at the 59th minute of this hour-long radio show, he commits to Virginia Tech. And I'm just sitting here just hurry up. I've already got the article written.
Right.
Just allow me to click submit, right? So I wasted that entire nice sunny Sunday or weekend afternoon in August in Blacksburg when it's the best weather for a guy who just decommitted a few months later. Right.
It's
Who
even
never
worse when
ended
you
up
do
playing
actual
at Virginia
stories
Tech.
on them,
Right,
and then they
so-
decommit
so
before they do anything.
I'm
here.
going to be counterproductive here. And like, if you pay close attention to recruiting, you're wasting half your time. You really are.
It wouldn't to hammer to that point. One last thing on this class, number 26 player in the state that year. I don't know if Tech was in on him early, and ended up going to West Virginia, transferred to Old Dominion after that, and now is at Virginia Tech. Ollie Jennings.
Yep.
And you look at this list. I mean, he's one of the really big success stories from all the players in that class. So I mean,
You went over a bunch of guys at the top who were busts, who were highly ranked.
Brandon Smith, Devin Ford, Sheridan Jones, Jaden Payute, Cam Kelly, another brief commitment here. Litchfield Adjavon,
Exactly.
Salim Turner Muhammad, Hakeem
Yeah,
Beeman.
you got some guys in there. Like the
Eugene
two.
Asante, Jalen Jones. That's the top 10.
You got a couple
Right.
guys that went to like Michigan that were successful, but like and the guy you mentioned from Florida, the Pac-12 kid, but like
right.
but
yeah.
it's Jennings.
Right. And the in-state top group that year, the top ranked guys were mostly busts, but guys like number 26. And this has been a trend in Virginia for a while now that I've noticed for like a 5 or 6 year stretch where a number of the top 10 guys went on to college and didn't do anything. But then you've got a bunch of random number 23, number 26, number 31, all turn out to be really good college players. I think the talent is still very much there in Virginia, but sometimes they're not ranked correctly.
Cool stuff. We ready to talk some women's hoops, guys?
Sure.
All right. Well, we flip the script here. We talk Virginia Tech women's basketball. First place in the ACC. David, you've been saying how this is a team right now that really controls their own destiny. You had an article about it this week.
Yeah, Virginia Tech's top of the ACC. Louisville lost at NC State. Virginia Tech is half a game ahead of both of them. Obviously goes to NC State on Thursday at number 3 in Reynolds. That's going to be a really good game. It's a rematch from a month ago, exactly today, when the Hokies came from behind and beat NC State in Blacksburg. This is a Virginia Tech team that, Tech beat Carolina over the weekend, number 24 in the country, second ranked road win of the year. Wasn't pretty by any means, but, and we were talking about this before we went on. I always and kind of keep an eye on what teams do when they aren't scoring the ball very well. And Tech did not have a very good offensive game. I thought Tech got a ton of good looks that didn't necessarily fall. I think it's obvious when you look from the outside. Like, I think Kayla King missed a bunch of threes that she probably should have had, but Matilda Eck made some clutch ones at the end. Elizabeth Kitley missed some shots that she usually makes. But Virginia Tech was fantastic on the glass, was great defensively, and made all the little 50-50 plays. One of the plays of the game for me is like Olivia Simiel run, it's a loose ball in the corner. Olivia Simiel grabs it, is like kind of like rolling around and throws it to Kayla King. Ball's outlet to Georgia Amor. She passes it to Matilda Eck, and they hit a transition 3. And like that's a play that like doesn't happen if Olivia Simiel doesn't go dive on the floor and grab that ball. Tech's doing all the little things right, and I was sitting there. I know, Gio, you were there as well in Carmichael Arena. I was sitting there, and I was just like, it's kind of just a matter of time. Virginia Tech's going to win this game, I think, if it can just hit some shots. Like, it was just a matter of time, and Tech eventually did. And I think this is a group that's playing with a lot of confidence right now, even when it's not necessarily scoring the ball, which is what you need.
You got something, Chris?
Yeah, I think he's figured out his rotation. I think Kenny Brooks has figured out his rotation. Remember, this is a team that only returned 3 players from last year's team, with a fourth who redshirted.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So a lot of new faces. So there's a lot of, there's talent, of course, but you've got to figure out how that talent mixes together. And I especially think that that has applied at probably the 4 spot more than anything else. Who Tech is playing there now and how much they're playing is a lot different than it was at the beginning of the season. And I think we've seen the team gel, but because I know everybody wants to play a big rotation, but Mike Young said this recently on either a Tech Talk Live or a post game that I was listening to. He's like, at this point in the season, it's more common for coaches to to shorten their rotation than expand it. And Kenny Brooks is going with basically a 7 to 8 woman rotation right now. We'll call it 7.5 just for the sake of argument.
Yeah,
And I think that,
and
that
I think you
helps
saw
to a
in
certain
action
extent.
against Carolina where I mean, and people have been asking me, why isn't Rose Mishaw playing? You know, she's a transfer from Minnesota and she was highly touted. I think it's, and I hate to bring the situation up, but I think it's very similar. It's very similar on court to the Ashley Owusu situation last year, where it got to a point where she just wasn't fitting in what Tech was doing. Now, I think Rose Mishaw, and I kind of wrote this yesterday, I think she still has a future at Virginia Tech. I mean, Kenny Brooks has praised her work ethic and everything, and she's been nothing but a positive to have. And who knows, maybe Tech will need her at some point. But she also has a year of eligibility left. And I think when Elizabeth Kitley moves on, you know, she can really help lift that front court. She'll be kind of the one veteran in that room still. But yeah, I mean, you saw it on Sunday. Carly Wenzel did not play the entire second half because Kayla King was out of foul trouble and was kind of fresh. That's the way Kenny Brooks described her on the radio show, his radio show yesterday. Clara Strack played a lot of minutes. And she split that with Olivia Sumiel. That was basically it. Karis Baker played like 2 or 3 minutes in the game, but he's these last 3 games I think have really showed what players really mesh well together, and I think Olivia Sumiel has been huge stepping into that role. Her contributions, she's not necessarily scoring the ball really, really well, but she's a big reason why Virginia Tech has out-rebounded 3 of the best teams in the conference at rebounding, and one of the reasons why Tech is skyrocketing up towards the top of best teams in the conference in rebounding because of her. You know, she's averaging about 6 or 7 rebounds per game. Elizabeth Kitley is obviously a really good rebounder, but I think they're also finding it their cohesiveness defensively. Clara Strack comes in. I think I wrote Clara Strack has like 10 blocks in her last 4 or 5 games. She's like a block machine, and she comes in there and you know she's going to play good defense. And yes, she might still be a little raw, but you know what you're going to get on that end. Carly Wenzel's playing great defense, and then it just comes down to scoring. And I agree. I think Kenny Brooks is starting to find that rotation, and they're playing well together, and they're winning. And when you are doing that, yeah, you can throw a Karis Baker in there for a little bit to give someone rest, but a lot of it also is situational stuff. And if Kayla King's not in foul trouble, you want to play Kayla King as much as possible because she's so valuable on both ends. So I like the position that they're in right now, and I agree. I think he's found something pretty good.
You know, it's interesting. This year's team and what has transpired so far throughout the season, in a lot of ways, mirrors exactly what we saw last year. You go all the way to the on-court stuff with now Rose Mishaw is kind of forced to take a little bit of a back seat, and Kenny is honing in on his rotation. You look at some of the numbers, Tech was 18-4 exactly at this point last year. Their last loss before, obviously, in the Final Four to LSU was on the road at Duke in ACC play, and then they never lost again. Now the Hokies have ripped off, 6 in a row at this point, 5 in a row at this point. David, just kind of interesting to look at the parallels and how this team, Kenny's teams now have a trend of really hitting their groove about midway point of ACC play.
Yeah, I think when this, in the story I wrote yesterday, on February 6, 2023, and February 6, 2024, Tech was 18-4 and 18th in the net in both. Now, obviously, that last year's team ended up being top 5 or 6 in the net and ended up getting a number 1 seed, and part of that is because of the stretch that it went on at the very end of the season. But yeah, I think, Gio, to your point, the one thing that this current team does not have is a bad loss. And I mean like a loss to a team it shouldn't lose to. Last year's team went on the road to Clemson and Miami and lost, and was able to kind of overcome that. And that Miami game was kind of an awakening for Taylor Soule a little bit, and she played much better. This group is, you could maybe look at the Duke loss again, and maybe it's something about just going to Cameron Indoor, right? Every single time Virginia Tech goes there, it's like it gets new life. Yeah,
maybe they should play them the first game of the season next year.
Yeah. But I think Georgia Amor sitting out that one game, and it gave her some time to kind of recalibrate a little bit. Kenny Brooks mentioned after the Virginia win on Thursday last week that she's playing with more energy. It's easy when your 2 All-Americans are scoring 50-plus points a game, which they did against UVA. They made 2 more field goals than the entire Virginia team. But then there are games where you're playing at Syracuse or you're playing at Carolina where you have to play good defense the entire game and you have to rebound well. You have to do the little things, and eventually your shot will fall. And I'm not worried. Just I don't think worry is the right word about Tech's shooting, because Tech's numbers haven't been, you look at Syracuse and Tech shot the ball okay, but Elizabeth Kitley was off. You look at the North Carolina game, Tech did not necessarily shoot the ball well, but I like the looks that Tech's getting. But I think the most important thing is on the other end, how they're defending. Even though Courtney Banghart said defense is not what they do, Tech is number 26th as of yesterday in adjusted defensive efficiency. Tech's defending really, really well, and I think part of it is Kenny Brooks has really honed in on a lineup that he likes.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a shot from Courtney Banghart there. Andy, want to get you involved in the flow of this conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's the stretch run here in the ACC is going to be fascinating, because you look at this and, I mean, how many teams could still win the ACC regular season? 4, 5? I mean,
there are 8. I wrote yesterday there are 8 teams that are less than 3 games behind Tech at the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's tight. And you look at this schedule. I mean, Tech goes on the road to play NC State, at Louisville, at Notre Dame. I mean, those are 3 ranked opponents. Tough. I mean, if you win any of those or all of them, they'd all be great wins.
Those are teams you could play in the Elite 8, maybe
right,
even Final
exactly.
4.
And then even the home games, Duke at home, we saw what Duke did the first time against them. North Carolina, took them right down to the wire and into overtime just recently. At Virginia at the tail end. I mean, not a gimme if you're going to play a rivalry game like that. I mean, this is a tough schedule down the stretch. If they do what they did last year, I mean, you'll be looking at probably a number 1 seed again. I think that's going to be a lot tougher to run the table and go on a magical run like that. But I mean, buckle up. These last couple of weeks and the schedule in the ACC, I think it's going to be pretty fun.
And then you've got the ACC tournament where you're probably going to have at least one more matchup with a team like that.
Yeah, probably 2. Yeah,
maybe 2,
it's so interesting.
I want to go ahead and take a peek at the home stretch of last season when they were able to run the table after Duke. So they played Virginia, Syracuse, NC State. They beat NC State, but it was kind of an off year for the Wolfpack. Not an off year in their they were still top 25, but being ranked 24 and top 5 are 2 different things. Florida State, they beat Florida State, beat Duke. Duke was better last year, a top 10 team at the time. NC State again, Carolina, and then your home stretch was Georgia Tech, Miami, Duke, Louisville. Honestly, it was just as tough.
Well, I think the biggest thing is in that stretch where Tech won so many games last year. North Carolina and NC State were the only road games. Excuse me. I believe North Carolina and NC State were the only road games, right? Virginia Tech, Andy just said it. Tech has to go to NC State on Thursday and then go to Louisville and then go to Notre Dame. And obviously those games there's stuff in between, but it's like that's just the way it shakes out this year. Last year, Virginia Tech got Louisville at home and beat them in January or February, lost to Notre Dame in December. This is a whole different conversation, but the way the new ACC schedule with the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But this is the year that Virginia Tech gets both Notre Dame and Louisville on the road. You got to go there. Tech already went up to Syracuse, who is also from that pod, and won up there in the Dome, and that's a big win. But you have to string it together. And I think the reason why those stats, those numbers are so interesting is because that team ended up jumping in the span of a month from 18th to top 5. Tech came out of nowhere. I remember after covering Virginia Tech winning the ACC championship against Louisville, and Tech had ripped off a stretch of 7 or 8 quadrant 1 wins with 1 or 2 others sprinkled in there. I remember walking into the post game in Greensboro Coliseum and Charlie Creams tweeting that he expects Tech to be a number 1 seed. And it's just really? That was kind of just unheard of. I don't expect Tech to get a number 1 seed because I think, and you can tell by the AP poll, teams aren't necessarily ebbing and flowing. South Carolina's up there, Iowa's up there. A lot of those top teams aren't necessarily losing, and there are a lot of really, really good teams. But Tech's a top 4 team for sure. And I think right now it's winning Tech has a really good chance to win the ACC and host, and Castle Coliseum is going to sell out as it is for the North Carolina game, Senior Day. I think a lot of it, like you'd love to be a number 1 seed again, but I think that's kind of like how special last year's team was. But to be able to at least clinch a double bye in the ACC tournament, if not win the conference, and then host NCAA tournament, that's so crucial. And I think when you look at the men's tournament, it's a little bit different, right? You go to a regional site. Virginia Tech could go play in Washington, D.C. or San Jose, when that's where Tech went a couple years ago. You're playing at a neutral site in a place where, okay, yeah, sure, there are a bunch of fans watching, but like it's a neutral site for a reason. This is like the thing that's so special about the women's tournament is that you get to host these games on your campus. Virginia Tech will have 8,925 people in the building every single time it plays an NCAA tournament game in Castle. And that's what's special about it. And Tech's selling out regular season games. And if Tech can get that makes the path to a Sweet 16 easier. So Tech is setting itself up for success right now. But this stretch, man, I mean, it's going to be a gauntlet, but it's going to be really fun.
Speaking of selling out, go over those numbers you put in your article yesterday. Do you remember them off the top of your head?
This is this is the 48th year of Virginia Tech women's basketball, and Tech had never sold out a regular season game up until this year. And Tech has sold out 3 in a month, or 8 weeks, I should say. Tech is on pace to North Carolina's the last regular season game. Tech should break the overall attendance record for attendance in a season by that game. Tech is blowing away the average attendance record. Just ridiculous numbers. And Tech's obviously had good crowds in Castle before. Castle once sat over 10,000, but they were never sellouts. And it's just really, really cool how much this program has grown, and it's a tough crowd to play in front of.
It is. And I think let's look at that from a financial standpoint. I don't have any numbers right in front of me, but I think if you're Whit Babcock, you don't budget for sellouts. You think you might have some, you hope to have some, but you don't set your budget up saying, yeah, we're going to have 4 sellouts this year and we're definitely going to host. I think those are added bonuses, almost, so to speak, from a budgetary standpoint.
What you got, Andy? I know you've been waiting.
Just to put a bow on how tough this schedule is coming up, the top 4 teams in the ACC right now, Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville, Syracuse, are 47-1 at home this season. The one loss, Virginia Tech went up to Syracuse and beat them.
Wow.
So you look at their next 2 road games, NC State, Louisville, they're both 12-0 at home this year. So good luck on the road. Those are going to be tough games. Yeah. I mean, if you could win those, I mean, man, you could sew up the ACC right there, but it is going to be tough to get through that unscathed.
The NC State game is so crucial, and I'll have a preview out on it later today. The last time NC State lost was when Virginia Tech walked in there on February 6th, 2023, last year, and beat the Wolfpack. And it's a very small, very, very small arena. In my opinion, it's the best home court atmosphere in the ACC. And River Baldwin's playing. So I think that honestly favors Tech a little bit more because NC State can't go small. Mimi Collins, she's about 6'1", I think. She played the 5 when NC State came to Blacksburg because River Baldwin was out. With her in the lineup, NC State can get out and go. And Tech struggled to contain NC State in transition. It's a really good 3-point shooting team. It's a really good jump shooting team. Really good in transition. With River Baldwin playing, very curious to see how much Westmore uses her because then they go bigger. And I think that actually plays in Tech's favor because Tech can slow the pace down and doesn't necessarily have to defend as much in transition. It's going to be a really, really, really good basketball game. I'm super excited. I think it's 8 p.m. on the ACC network. So NC State's on a quicker turnaround because NC State played on Monday against Louisville in what was the KYAL game.
So
Play for
just
K game.
to kind of piggyback, David, what do you like about the matchup between Baldwin and Kitley? What can Kitley kind of exploit there this time around?
Well, I think Kitley had 27 and 12 the last time they played. Again, just kind of casual numbers, casual double. Kitley is the best post player in the conference, but what changes there is that what changes is more defensively for Virginia Tech, because now Tech kind of it's kind of more of a traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matchup instead of NC State playing small ball. I think Tech matched it a little bit at times and played larger, where Tech went with Clara Strack and Elizabeth Kitley, but it's tough to do when their tallest player is 6'2". You can't have. It's tough to have 2 6'5" players or 6'6" players on the floor against a team that doesn't have a girl taller than 6'2". So it's going to be very interesting chess match. I think if Baldwin plays, it favors Tech because Tech is able to play NC State straight up defensively and doesn't have to maybe at times feel like it needs to get a smaller forward on the floor. I think Karis Baker, if I remember, played a little bit more in that game because she's got some length and she can shoot it and she can stretch the floor. It's going to be an interesting chess match. Kenny Brooks and Westmore are obviously very, very close. He always jokes that they're close because they're Cowboys fans. But I'm very interested to kind of just see how this plays out. If Virginia Tech can win this game, that Tech will have swept NC State, and Tech will go, I guess it depends on what Louisville does, but Tech has the potential to go 2 games ahead in the ACC standings. That is crucial.
Kenny Brooks is a Cowboys fan, huh? I'd never heard anybody say an ill word about Kenny Brooks until just now.
You've never heard? He'll talk about it in the press conferences every
I believe,
once in a while.
I believe he said it was around Christmas. He said Carly Wenzel, who's of course from San Antonio, got him a CeeDee Lamb jersey for Christmas. I think that's what he said. So yeah, he's a big Cowboys fan.
Yeah, it was a tough one for him and them Cowboys this time around. Guys, anything else on women's basketball before we talk a little bit of men's hoops? Feeling good? All right, sweet. Well, time to take a very short break here, a pause, I should say, and tell everyone, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. All right, talking men's basketball here, the Hokies. David, Chris, Andy, whoever wants it, is it all but wrapped up for Virginia Tech when it comes to the postseason? Realistically, what does it take to make some insane run at the tournament?
I would
at
say
this point?
it's not quite wrapped up.
Okay.
Because
But we're getting there?
But I mean, look, Tech is the metrics like Tech. Like Tech is top 55 in the net. That's a good spot to be when you only have 13 wins. Like I haven't looked, but Tech might be the highest ranked 13 win team in
Probably,
there.
yeah.
The problem is, and again, I'll go back to what Andy wrote after the Duke game. That was a missed opportunity. And then Tech went on the road and lost to Miami. 2 missed opportunities back to back. When you get to March, when the committee does, I always remember on Selection Sunday where the selection committee would put resumes up against each other. The CBS guys would talk about it. It's like, okay, here's the eye test, right? Which team has a better resume? If you don't have quality wins, it doesn't matter. Virginia Tech could win 7 of its next how many Tech has 8 games left? Yeah, 9 games left. Tech could win 8 of the next 9 games, beat everybody except for North Carolina, and have 20 or 21 wins, but not get in because it doesn't have any quality wins, and that's the problem here. Like it's an average team, or a slightly above average team that has played well in stretches. You have to beat good teams, and Tech will have a chance, I think, when Virginia comes. UVA's won 7 in a row, hottest team in the ACC after Carolina's lost 2 of its last 3. And
With a win over Duke.
With a win over Duke. It changes the fact if you can go into Chapel Hill and win. But right now, I haven't seen anything that says Virginia Tech can win. And I think what's really disappointing is Tech led with 8 minutes to go.
They had
in Miami
either 2 or 3 different 10-point leads in that game.
Yeah, and like you lead with 5 minutes to go in Miami and you can't hold on. That would have been a quadrant 1 win, and the conversation's completely different. You need quadrant 1 wins at the end of the day, and Virginia Tech could maybe go up to Pitt or go up to Syracuse if those teams are there and win. I don't know if UVA is really going to get into the top 30. It's possible. Maybe Wake Forest would, but there's no guarantee they stay there. You know a Duke's going to stay there in the top 30. You know a Miami's going to stay in the top 75. That's kind of the situation Tech's in. Tech can win, but unless it like goes on the road and beats Carolina, it's really going to have to pull a rabbit out of the hat to really do something here.
My concern the whole time has been overall number of wins, and like Tech is sitting at 13 wins, and teams that are 13-9 generally don't go on to make the NCAA tournament. And I said that when they were 13-7 also. You play 2 more ACC games now rather than 2 more dog opponents in non-conference. 2 easy wins, which not only give you 2 wins, but they help your efficiency ratings, which helps you in the net rankings and all that. So I think you have with the 20-game ACC schedule, I think you have less margin for error now. And that goes for everybody, and that's why right now, how many teams are projected to make the field from the ACC?
4 or 5.
Right.
UVA's obviously played very well.
Yeah, they've
lately.
worked their way back in. Like 2 weeks ago, it was only like 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Clemson, Virginia should complement North Carolina and Duke. Obviously, Clemson beat Carolina last night.
That was
and I think Wake Forest is right there on the bubble. But I mentioned this to Gio before we walked in here. Wake Forest doesn't have a quad.
Doesn't have a quad 1 win.
Now they play Duke twice, and the Deacons come to Blacksburg, so like that's a potential quadrant 1 win for Wake here. But again, it's Wake Forest is going to be in a similar boat. Wake Forest could have a little bit better resume than Tech, but if it doesn't have a Q1,
they could have a better record, but they don't. But 2 fewer Q1 wins or something like that. My feelings on this team, they ebb and flow to a certain extent, like everybody else, based on game-to-game performance, but my overall view hasn't changed since the very beginning. In our preseason podcast, I said I thought they'd be an NIT team, and I was worried about guard depth when Rodney Rice just left in October. And so you look at some of these close losses, like the 2 Miami games and the South Carolina loss, and I'm not blaming him because for the second year in a row he's been asked to play more minutes than he should be right now at this point in his development. But in those games, MJ Collins has averaged 2.7 points per game. Rodney Rice would have averaged, look what he did down the stretch last year. Played very well for Tech down the stretch last year when he was a freshman and had no preseason and had missed most of the year due to injury. I think a healthy on the team Rodney Rice, Tech's 2 to 3 games better right now, and we're having a different conversation.
And I think part of that is because Sean Padula's on the floor last.
Yeah, and Padula's played 36 minutes a game over his last 9. And before the season, we're like, finally, he had to play too much
Mike Young
last
sat
year.
in this chair and said, I can't believe I finally have a chance to get Sean Padula off the floor.
He said he did Padula a disservice, but he had no choice. And that's kind of been the same thing again this year. He did sit more earlier in the season. A little bit of that was due to injury, but now, Rex Steiner was not ready after about 5 ACC games.
And Rex Steiner got poked in the eye and has been sick.
Right. So but even before that, he had a 1-to-4 assist to turnover ratio in ACC play, so he was not ready for ACC minutes. And then Rice isn't on the team like you expected him to be. So you go from Padula playing an anticipated 30 minutes a game to 36 minutes a game, and that's too much. So this team has, MJ Collins should probably be the second guard off the bench for an NCAA tournament team. He's starting.
Yeah. And I think he's played well in moments.
Yeah, he has.
But
he might score 17 against Duke, but then the next game he scores 0.
Yeah, and he's playing good defense, but you need his scoring contributions.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's finding ways to contribute in more ways. This again, I think he's gotten better. When it's not Sean Padula bringing the ball up the court, it's MJ Collins. He's made himself valuable to be able to play multiple roles and things like that. But for me, I I think it was not fairly obvious, but I've thought since Virginia Tech start in ACC play that they weren't going to make the tournament. And my mind always looks ahead. So my mind is always like, okay, what are they going to do at guard in the transfer portal? Because they didn't sign any guards out of high school. And as we know, even if you had signed a guard out of high school, they're not ready to play big minutes as freshmen most of the time. So who are they going to get in the transfer portal? First of all, you have to replace Hunter Couture, who's a very, very good player.
Who leads the ACC in offensive rating,
right.
I should add.
Right. And was the Virginia Tech's all-time three-point shooter, excellent defender, just a very, very good all-around basketball player who knows the system. First, you have to replace his production. You need to get another starter, too, if you want to take a step forward. You can't just say, oh, well, we know that we know the light's going to come on for MJ Collins next year, or we know that the light's going to come on for Brandon Reckstein or Young, or any of those guys. You can't assume that. Tech has to go out and get two starting caliber guards in the portal this year. That's how they get themselves back to possibly
and
making
go get a
the NCAA tournament.
4.
I would play nickel at the 4.
Yeah, but I think you need a 4 for. I mean,
Yeah,
if nickel's your
another
only
one.
option at
Right,
the 4.
right,
Yeah,
right,
and then
yeah.
who knows about Kid and Poteet?
Yeah, if you don't play nickel at the 4, then you've got to go get 2 4s, unless you want to play the true freshman at least 20 minutes a game.
Needs everything.
Yeah,
it's a pretty
well,
lengthy checklist for the offseason.
You probably don't need a center if Petit and Kidd come back. In fact, I know you don't, but
Yeah.
that's a conversation between Mike Young and
Yeah.
them. But yeah. I think there's a lot of work to do. I think Mike Young's a very, very good coach. But I think, as I've said this before, in hindsight, hiring Mike Jones as a top assistant, it was a high risk, high reward thing. Like Rodney Rice came here, Buchanan came here because of Mike Jones, but then he left just about as soon as he got here. So those guys are out the door. So, and you've seen what Buchanan's doing at George Mason.
George Washington.
George Washington, that's right. He would not necessarily, he wouldn't be putting up those exact numbers at Virginia Tech, obviously, but he would be a good, solid rotational piece. And Rodney Rice would be starting. So you're down, instead of that hire actually improving Virginia Tech's team, it's actually made it worse because of the guys he brought in left. And you're down a starter and a half. If you would just sign 2 other players, even if they were just average players, you would at least have depth. Virginia Tech does not have 2 All-Americans like the women's team does, so that means they need more depth, right? They need more versatility. They need more options.
And they don't really have
They don't have it, especially in the backcourt.
Did you have something, Andy?
Yeah, just big picture. I mean, they needed one of those 2 last week. I mean, even if you don't beat Duke, you look at an eminently beatable Miami team that just went up and scored 38 points in Charlottesville in a pretty bad loss up there. I mean, that Miami team was there for the taking. And
They lost to Louisville.
And the Hokies went 0-2 against them. I mean, their last 3 games with Miami, they lost to an NC State team that's not exactly hitting on all cylinders right now, and they lost by 22 at Virginia and scored 38 points. I mean, that's a team you have to beat. And, essentially Virginia Tech's painting itself into a corner. There's only one path out, and that's, going into Chapel Hill and winning and going on a streak here at the end of the year because, if you run off a lot of wins against teams that are also not going to make the tournaments, you're probably not impressing anybody. So, there's really one path forward to make some sort of magical run here, and those don't happen very often. It happened a couple years ago,
I was gonna say,
but it's that is rare. You're not going to get that a lot. And I don't know. This team just doesn't feel like they have it.
Yeah, I mean Tech won three straight ACC games earlier in the year, but just very hit or miss. And I think the depth comes back into play. And people want to harp on Sean Padula, and yeah, he's turning the ball over a lot, but he was also being asked to do everything. And I think Hunter Couture is the key to this team. I mentioned it to Will earlier. We were talking about this in the office before we came on the podcast. Hunter Couture leads the ACC in offensive rating, effective field goal percentage, and true shooting percentage. He's one of the best offensive players, and teams have defended him so well. That's made Tech's life so difficult. Tyrese Proctor, I think, is a great example. When Duke came in here, Proctor, who's about 6'5" and very lengthy, they put Proctor on Duke, and I talked about this last week. they put Proctor on Couture and also switched Filipowski onto him. Miami did a really good job of switching guys around on him. I'm trying to remember which guards, but I think it's like keeping guys fresh. Like teams are keeping guys fresh to stick on Couture, and Couture has to play defense and guard the other team's best player too. So it's just it's exhausting there. If he's not getting looks, those are fewer looks he has, which means more looks probably for Padula. And I think the biggest thing is like Padula is playing at a high level, but the ball's also in his hands a lot more, which means he's going to turn the ball over a little bit more. And
when you play 36 minutes, there's automatically going to be more turnovers because you're in the game more than almost any other point guard.
And I don't even. Sean Padula maybe came off the court for like a minute or two in that Miami game, but it's like if he's playing almost every single minute, that takes a toll. And I think just all around across the board, Tech could be playing better basketball. And you know, when Sean Padula's turning the ball over because he's on the floor too much, and Hunter Couture's not getting enough shot attempts because teams are defending him so well, and Tech's fighting to get him backdoor and get him good looks. And then MJ Collins isn't scoring the ball from three. You need contributions from Tyler Nickel, and those have ebbed and flowed. And Robbie Barron, I think, has played pretty well as of late. And I think Elijah Poteet and Lynn Kidd have been on and off. But like for this team to be good, everybody has to be playing on together. And Tech hasn't been doing that right now.
Well, a lot coming up for Virginia Tech athletics in the next week. You got, obviously, on Thursday night, the big one against NC State down in Raleigh for women's basketball. Men's basketball at Notre Dame on Saturday. Softball gets going this week on Friday. They start with one of their tournaments. They got Illinois and Auburn both on Friday, so that's big. Baseball's coming up next week. Wrestling's got Duke inside the Moss Arts Center coming up. And then on Saturday, the next day, so it's Friday and then Saturday, they're back in Castle against George Mason. Lacrosse starts their season on Saturday with a home game at Thompson against VCU. So if you're a fan of the Olympic sports as well, it's a big weekend for that as those get underway. Some big basketball games coming up. What's coming up for you guys editorial content-wise?
Oh, goodness. Brandon Patterson has sent another scouting report on, I forget who he sent it on, but I'll post that later today. I'm going to do my half-star ratings. That'll be released tomorrow. I wanted to wait till after signing day just in case Tech signed anybody else, which they're not going to. I've already mostly finished the article, but it'll be posted tomorrow. My normal Friday Q&A. David, I know you've got a lot of stuff coming up as well with women's basketball, and
I have a lot of stuff coming up. Yeah. First I wanted to ask. I saw Brandon Patterson. I did not have a chance to read Brandon Patterson's. He wrote one on Gilliam
yesterday.
How are those? What should people, when people are reading those scouting reports, what should people be keeping an eye out for?
I think just the type of player that Tech recruits. Like he's doing work on the defensive tackles now, and so like Pollard is gone, but he's kind of replaced by Aeneas Peoples, a very similar style player. Mario Kendricks is gone. He's replaced by Gilliam, who's a very similar style player. So I think you've got Gilliam and Fuga in one defensive tackle spot that are very similar in how they play. And then those other two guys I mentioned in the other spot who were very similar in their style of play, and that's the sort of things I'm taking out of that. I think it's pretty good roster management. Yeah. It's just some like for like replacement.
Interesting. That's cool. I'll have to check that out. We got a lot of stuff going on. I'll be down in Raleigh. We got women's basketball stuff coming up for me. Jack, who's behind the scenes producing, will be covering the wrestling matches this weekend in Blacksburg. When I get off of this set, I'm going to go post 2 feature stories, one for softball, one for baseball. Sam Mostow wrote one for us on softball. Raza Umarani wrote one for us on baseball. Chip Grubb will have a weekend preview of the Auburn tournament, I should say. Baseball starts next weekend. Very, very, very busy. Very busy.
Not for me. I got a mailbag going tomorrow. That's just like trying to figure out stuff to write. I'm working on trying to get Pry at some point the off season. I'll have more content with that, but might help out with more basketball stuff here down the stretch. Some interesting games coming up.
Sweet.
They could make it more interesting for you if today was actually signing day.
Yeah, if there was anybody signing, but alas, that's a time of the past.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for your time. It was a fun one. That'll do it for episode 346 of the Tech Sideline podcast. For Jack Brizendine, Andy Bitter, David Cunningham, Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long from Blacksburg, and we'll see you next week.